Colleagues, I'll call the meeting to order and welcome to the 99th meeting of the Government Operations and Estimates Committee. Today's meeting will be continuing on with our study of Bill C-24. I'd like to welcome our Minister with us today, the Honourable Bartas Shager. Welcome, Minister. Thank you for being here. Colleagues, we will have the Minister with us for approximately an hour. Following that, the PCO officials will remain until 12:45 if needed. I will need at least 15 minutes at the end of the meeting to deal with committee business, so our analysts can discuss with you the drafting of our report on government advertising. If, however, questions have been exhausted prior to that, we will suspend, excuse the witnesses, and go directly into in-camera and talk about the draft report. And with those brief opening remarks from your chair, Minister, thank you for being here. I understand you've got some opening remarks. We'll try and keep your remarks to about 10 minutes. If it looks like you're going over time, I'll try and catch your attention and ask you to wrap it up so we have more time for questions from our colleagues around the table. And with that, Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, I bring with me today my deputy as well as Martha, the Privy Council officer. Donc, j'ai le plaisir de vous parler aujourd'hui de la manière.
I have the pleasure to speak today on how the government is equalizing the status of all members of the Prime Minister's ministerial team and ensuring that the government continues to have the flexibility to deliver on its commitments to Canadians.
The Consolidated Revenue Fund of a ministerial salary to individuals who have been appointed to ministerial positions listed in that Act. There are currently 35 ministerial positions listed in the Salaries Act, including the position of Prime Minister. From time to time, the list of Salaries Act ministers changes to align with the priorities of the government of the day and the Prime Minister's preference with respect to the composition of the ministry. This is not new. Legislation amending the list of Salaries Act ministers was enacted in 2005, 2012, and 2013.
Canada needs a modern, agile, and flexible government that's organized in a way that is suited to delivering on its priorities and commitments. These amendments help us to do precisely that.
With administrative distinctions and makes equal the status of all ministers in the current ministry by adding to the Salaries Act 5 ministerial positions that will replace 5 current Minister of State appointments. Conventionally, ministers of state have been considered junior ministers because they have most often been appointed to assist other ministers with their portfolio responsibilities. This way of thinking and operating is not suited to the current context, as it fails to reflect both the importance of the subject matters at issue and the value of equality to this Prime Minister and our government more broadly. Les 5 nouveaux postes de ministre.
The 5 new ministerial positions to be added to the Act are the Minister of la Francophonie, the Minister of Small Business and Tourism, the Minister of Science, the Minister of Status of Women, and the Minister of Sport and Persons with Disabilities.
Roles and responsibilities becoming of full ministers. The Minister of la Francophonie pursues Canada's strong and sustained commitment to the 80 member states and governments of the Francophonie. Together, these constitute more than 1/3 of the United Nations membership and account for a population of over 890 million people worldwide, including 220 million French speakers. The Minister of Science contributes to the competitiveness of Canada in a global, knowledge-based economy through supporting scientific research and the integration of scientific considerations in the government's investment and policy choices. The Minister of Science is a lead minister for a number of science-related funding programs, including the Canada Research Chairs, and for several portfolio agencies such as the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, otherwise known as NSERC. Innovation is a key priority for our government, and science will help us continue to build an economy that is both environmentally sustainable and prosperous. The Minister of Sport and Persons with Disability promotes healthier Canadians through sport and recreation and works to ensure greater accessibility and opportunities for Canadians with disabilities. The Minister has been tasked with developing legislation to transform how the Government of Canada addresses accessibility and leads on a number of important funding programs, including the Enabling Accessibility Fund. The Minister of Status of Women champions equality, addresses issues of gender-based violence, advances the prosperity and economic security of women, and works to increase the representation of women in leadership and decision-making roles. In my role as Minister of Small Business and Tourism, I support Canada's small businesses, the backbone of our economy, by helping them to grow through trade and innovation in order for them to create jobs, support communities, and launch world-class companies. I'm also working to grow Canada's tourism industries by promoting Canada as a world-class destination for international tourists. As you can see, these portfolios are important to our economy, to Canadians, and to government. Formalizing the status of these 5 appointments as ministers in full standing reflects the importance of these 5 positions and the expectations placed on the people that occupy them. Once these positions are added to the Salaries Act with the adoption of Bill C-24, the orders in Council that assign these ministers to assist other ministers will be repealed, and these ministers will be in law what they already are in practice, full ministers. I would like to take a moment to address the issue of costs. The cost of the current ministry will not change with enactment of Bill C-24. Only the payment mechanism will change, and let me explain. Ministers whose position are listed in the Salaries Act receive their ministerial salary under the authority and out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund. Ministers appointed under the Ministries and Minister of State Act receive a salary determined by the Prime Minister and paid out of the applicable department vote as provided for in annual appropriation acts. That has been the legislative framework for over 2 decades. Once Bill C-24 is passed, the former Ministers of State will be appointed to the new Salaries Act positions and will be paid under the authority of that Act. All 30 members of the Prime Minister's ministerial team already receive the same ministerial salary. That has been the case since our first day in office and will not change with the enactment of this bill. Bill C-24 creates a framework that will allow these ministers to continue to be supported by existing departments in carrying out their responsibilities. No new departments need to be created as a result of this legislation. Bill C-24 would increase the number of ministers that could be paid a ministerial salary under the Salaries Act from 35 to 37, including the Prime Minister, representing an increase of 2 ministerial positions that could be paid out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund. Let me point out, however, that this Prime Minister currently has 34 ministerial positions available to him under the Salaries Act, but has appointed only 30 individuals to the ministry. This bill is not fundamentally aimed at growing the ministry. Its goal is simply to formalize in legislation the equal status of the current ministry and to modernize the Act to enable more flexible and adaptable ministries in the future. Les modifications figurant dans le
Bill C-24 amendments are not just about addressing government priorities in the immediate term. We also want to ensure that future ministries can be structured in ways that meet emerging priorities.
Bill C-24 would add 3 untitled ministerial positions to the Salaries Act. These positions can be titled at the discretion of the Prime Minister to reflect the priorities of the time. In this way, the Prime Minister can adjust his or her cabinet and its positions to respond to changing priorities or challenges facing the country. The alignment of all regional development agencies under one portfolio, especially under the Minister responsible for national economic development, is another example of this. We now have regional and national expertise all working together. This creates better synergy and opportunities for greater progress and provides the flexibility needed to make a real impact in communities across Canada. The regional development agencies will all continue to fulfill their mandates of supporting small and medium-sized enterprises in becoming more innovative, productive, and export-oriented. They will continue to work with communities and economic development organizations to identify and generate opportunities for local economic growth. They will also continue to provide programs and services to entrepreneurs and communities that build on the distinct competitive regional advantage. All the regional agencies working together will ensure cohesion between them and help grow the economy and deliver results to Canadians in all regions of the country. Having them all report to Parliament through the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development serves to highlight the important role economic development plays across Canada's regions. Enfin, le projet de loi...
Finally, the legislation also changes the legal title of the Minister of Infrastructure, Communities and Intergovernmental Affairs to the Minister of Infrastructure and Communities. This is intended to reflect the fact that the Prime Minister has taken on the role of Intergovernmental Affairs Minister.
What has already been in practice since day one of this government. The Prime Minister's cabinet is a group of equals of non-legislative steps have already been taken to recognize the equal status of its members. These amendments address an administrative constraint in current legislation and catch it up with the structure of the ministry as it operates today. We are resolute in our belief that a modern ministry that prioritizes equality, fairness, and flexibility will better provide outcomes for all Canadians. I would like to thank the honourable members of this committee for their time and for inviting me to share my views. I look forward to your questions and your comments. With that, Mr. Chair, thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being so concise with your remarks. We'll now go to our round of questions. It will be a 7-minute round to begin with, and Madame Shanahan, you're first up.
Thank you very much, Chair, and merci, Madame la Ministre, d'être ici.
Thank you, Ms. Minister, for being here with us this morning. It's always interesting because C-24 is an administrative bill since we're making changes to an existing legislation. But it still does represent fundamental changes for our system and how we organize our departments and our ministers. But the first question for you is, one of the changes proposed in Bill C-24 is to remove the reference to a certain number of ministers that no longer, departments that no longer exist, the Department of Regional Development, for example. How will this affect the economic development of regions in the country that have different needs? Thank you for your question. I think it would be better for the regions. They can all work together. Right now we have regions who cannot share their best practices and what works in their regions. I think all regional development organizations can work together and share their best practices.
Support the regional diversity of our country. So regional development agencies will continue to do the work that they do. They will continue to be present in the regions, but they will not only have regional expertise, they will also now have national expertise by being able to work under one minister.
Thank you very much for that. Puis, donc, pour continuer sur la...
Continue on with my question. The Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development has the authority under the current structure for regional development. Do you see any potential conflicts, since either of these departments could have competing priorities in decision-making with regard to their own departments? During the election, we talked with Canadians, and they told us that the government must work better together. So I think it's good to have different perspectives and varying opinions. It's always essential to work together and to have dialogue in the best interests of Canadians.
There is disagreements, but if we can work better together and have those real conversations, I believe we will better serve the needs of Canadians and the diversity of this country.
Is there an example that you can share with us without getting into cabinet confidentiality, and an example that you can speak to us about where it was beneficial to have the regional development agencies under one ministry?
So if you actually look at, in my other hat as Minister of Small Business and Tourism, we came out with a tourism strategy by working with provinces and territories and municipalities. What we were able to see is that there were certain regions that have a different approach that other regions were not using. By them being able to work better together and communicating with each other, they were able to share those best practices. So let's take OGGO as an example. Tourism industry is essential in the Atlantic region. They support their small and medium-sized businesses in a different way than, let's say, WD. So they are now able to say what they are doing and exchange ideas. When it came to the tourism vision, we were able to see that there's better opportunities for our small businesses across the country now to work together because they have things in common. Without that conversation coming together, it was not the case, but now that they're working together and have a reason to come together, it's about strengthening our country as one country. But we will never forget the diversity of our regions. When the Prime Minister talks about diversity as our strength, he's not only talking about the shells that we occupy, but he's talking about our experiences, he's talking about our regional diversity and so forth. We will always promote that because that is what strengthens Canada.
Well, thank you very much for that, because yes, you're here in your function, of course, Minister, as House Leader, but also you wear that other hat as small business and tourism. Do I have time for another question?
You've got about 2.5 minutes.
All right. So for Mr. McCowan, I believe this would be around the numbers, the salary costs that we're looking at. So apparently we're looking at an additional cost of approximately $20,000 per Minister of State that will be retrieved entirely from the Consolidated Revenue Fund of Canada. So I'm just looking at, I would just like to know, have all the ministers that are affected, have they already accepted the increased salary? Is it retroactive? And what is the total financial impact of this initiative? Which 5 times 20, 100,000. That's going to be paid out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund.
So all of the ministers have been paid the same salary since day one. What's going to change is the funding mechanism, if you will. So ministers who are appointed under the Salaries Act, those funds flow from the Consolidated Revenue Fund. Ministers of State, the funds flow under appropriations. So it's just a question for if the Salaries Act were to become law, all of the ministers in Cabinet, their salaries would flow from the Consolidated Revenue Fund. So it's just a question of which stream the funding comes through, but all of the ministers have been paid the same since day one.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all for me, Chair.
Go to Mr. McCauley for 7 minutes, please.
Mr. Welcome, Mr. McCowan, Ms. Boyle, welcome as well. Just getting back to Mr. McCowan, your comments from day one, and I understand that. Was it not paid back to day one? I recall, and perhaps my memory is foggy, that this whole came about when our previous leader commented about, despite this gender equity, that the ministers of states, the lower paid junior ministers, were all women, and that's when we saw, oh no, we're going to go back and fix it. Was it in their original letters of offer from the very second they came aboard, or was it backdated a week, 2 weeks later?
So I'm going to have to go back and check on that. My understanding, and perhaps Ms. Boyle can...
Minister, I assume, would know?
My understanding is that it's been the same since day one, but Minister...
It's been the same since day one.
Perfect. Now, C-24, do you believe this bill is all about, it's making the pay equal, or do you believe it also makes their responsibilities equal?
I really believe it's about the decisions at the Cabinet table and having the voices represented, because opinions matter and diversity of opinions matter. We know that these portfolios are essential to the growth of the economy and the betterment of Canadians, I would say, and think that's what it is. So equal ministers with equal opportunity.
But the bill doesn't actually change any of their powers or authorities. Am I correct in that?
So we're, and it will come into how you want to view that. For myself and the vision of this government, it's really about the whole of government approach, working together. We know that when it comes to departments as well, there is many things that are in common.
I'll tell you where I'm getting this at. Minister's authority power is granted and derived from the Financial Administration Act. C-24 doesn't appear to make changes to that act that grants such powers to the old Minister of State. So, for example, the Minister of Status of Women is still not able to deliver a memorandum to Cabinet without it being co-signed by the Minister of Heritage. That's what I'm getting at, is this bill doesn't address their actual authorities. It's optics. We're changing the salaries, but the Minister of State for Status of Women still, for example, to deliver a memorandum of cabinet, still has to have another minister who's technically part of her department go sign.
What I would say to that personally is that in my opening comments, I gave examples as to where ministers in these positions will have the authority to do the work they need to do. I know that within my other hat as Minister of Small Business and Tourism, I am responsible to make sure the voice of small businesses in the tourism industry is represented. I work hard on their behalf, and I know on numerous occasions I have reminded colleagues that small business and tourism is the thread that connects all departments. So it's essential that when people are making decisions that they are considering the benefit of all Canadians to ensure that we have the opportunities for Canadians to succeed.
Okay.
Can the Deputy add?
Minister Macaulay, if I could just come back to the question that you raised, the first one. If I understood correctly, you indicated that there was some issue in the first couple of weeks. We can certainly undertake to look into that. My understanding is ministers were paid the same from day one, but if there's some issue about...
No, the minister said from day one, so I'll accept that. I just want to get back again to the ministers. Again, we've heard so much about, they're equal. We had a very learned professor here on Tuesday whose comment about what your government was doing is, her comment was, I would say it's dishonest. That's the word I would use. And she was talking about the equality of the cabinet. And you kind of confirm what I've been asking is the Minister of State for Status of Women does not have the same authority as another minister, such as the Minister of Heritage. We also see it in the responsibilities, but also the budgets. And our friends of the public accounts were here or just before us. And we're looking at the spending. Minister Baines, who science reports to, has $2 million spent. Minister Duncan spent $885,000 in her budget. Yourself, $837,000. Heritage, $1.9 million. Sports was $770,000 under Minister Qualtrough. Ministers Monsef and Haiju was $900,000. So it seems a very specific set of responsibilities given, not only with power and authority, but also very specific responsibilities. I just want to move over now to just the changes under the economic development. Your comment was it's better for the regions, but I just want to read a couple comments from stakeholders. La Presse, for example, says Quebec manufacturers and exporters and the Chamber of Commerce are happy that, okay, 3 Montreal ministers. However, they're worried that what will happen when the Economic Development Agency of Canada for the regions of Quebec, which seem to be dropped off the radar. It's meant that business leaders used to have an intensive year in Ottawa under previous systems. Cape Breton Post, how much attention will the minister pay to Cape Breton based on his political influence? Not much, according to White. The more you push these agencies out of big centers to big centers like Toronto, Ottawa, or maybe Montreal, as a base of decision-making for these organizations, the less they are in tune with the regions they are trying to help the most. And we have limited time, but I've got 9 pages of quotes from various stakeholders, including stakeholders that your East Coast MPs heard at various roundtables. I'm just trying to figure out how you can say that it's better for the regions when you're actually taking away direct input from the stakeholders in the regions and the people closest to the ground in the regions.
You've only got about 30 seconds for your response.
Hence, I only read 2 quotes.
The RDAs will continue to fulfill their mandates in the regions. The voices of the regions will always be heard. The work being done in the regions will remain in the regions. It's essential work they do. That's how economic development takes place. And that's why the regional diversity of the country is essential. We will always take that
so you're saying moving it to Toronto is better for Newfoundland?
Nothing is moving.
Region.
The regional development agencies will continue to fulfill their mandates.
Mr. Macaulay, we've got limited time here, so I'd like to hear completion of the minister's comments.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the regional development agencies will continue to fulfill their mandates in the regions. The RDAs are not moving, and we should not ever give that impression, because we want them to have confidence in the system. What's happening here is that you have regional expertise as well as national expertise. And it's essential that regions be able to work together, that they be provided the supports, but nothing is changing for the RDAs in the sense that they will continue to have the economic impact within the regions to best respond to the challenges and opportunities in the region.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Blakey, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. So we heard today that the ministers appointed as ministers of state under the current legal framework already have the same salary. They already have the same title. Presumably they're already taken just as seriously around the cabinet table, and that there won't be any new departments created. So they'll continue to be supported by departments as they are now. Ministers of state for whom a department is designated will be effectively served in the same way as ministers of state are now. So in what sense does this bill make ministers more equal in a way that they aren't already?
Great question. It formalizes what's taking place already. And it also provides opportunities to be able to respond to new challenges that might come. We want a government that's able to respond, ideally to be proactive. This provides...
So strictly speaking, this legislation isn't actually necessary in order to accomplish the equality of cabinet ministers.
It's true that we have already put into practice what this legislation is asking, but I believe it is essential to formalize it, to also provide future governments the opportunity to recognize the importance of these portfolios as equal ministers. The work that the public service does is essential work, and I will tell you, as my other hat as Minister of Small Business and Tourism, it's not just innovation, science, and economic development that provides me supports.
I mean, the kind of equality that might be addressed in this legislation would be administrative, let's call it. So right now you have ministers. For the most part, all those ministers are responsible for a department. Usually the language in legislation says that they preside over or has the management and direction of a department. Will the new kind of minister have those same powers and authorities?
Every minister is provided with the resources necessary to accomplish.
But strictly speaking, they won't preside over or have the management and direction of a department.
I'll give you innovation, science, and economic development as an example. Minister Baines, Minister Duncan, and myself work closely together. We work as a team.
But if the inequality under the law right now is that you have ministers, and that's what we call ministers, who preside over and have the management and direction of a department, and ministers of state don't, is it the case that the new type of minister will preside over, have the management and direction over a department? And if that's not the case, then doesn't the same administrative inequality continue to exist under this legislation, just under a new name?
What's clear is that this government is taking a whole of government approach and doing government differently to better respond.
I know, but we're here talking about a law that's supposed to address some kind of inequality. The press release about the law talks about recognizing the equality of all cabinet ministers. It's not just about the pay, because the pay is already done. It's not just about the title, because obviously you can style ministers of state as ministers. So presumably it's meant to address some kind of other inequality. The remaining type of inequality seems to be that they don't have the same administrative function as other ministers, but this legal change doesn't actually give them those powers, because it creates two types of minister. You have a minister in the traditional sense, let's say, and then a minister for whom a department is designated, and their administrative responsibilities are clearly less than those of the other kind of minister. Otherwise, we would just have one kind of minister in the Act. So how is it that this Act actually addresses what the only kind of standing form of inequality is, which is a difference in their administrative role and responsibility? Can you just explain that for us? Because that's been the one thing about this debate I've found very elusive, is just kind of pinpointing the relevant sense of equality that's being addressed by the bill. If not, it seems to me that this is, to put it frankly, just a kind of colossal waste of parliamentarians' time. Because if they're already being called ministers, they're already being paid the same as ministers. If after this legislation is in effect, they're essentially going to be supported in the same way as ministers of state who are granted being called ministers and paid the same are currently, then it's not clear to me that the time we're spending on this is warranted.
Mr. Chair, so a couple of thoughts in response. So first of all, I think in terms of the broad strokes of the bill, I think the intent is to formalize in legislation. The ministry has been done a number of times over the past few ministries. In terms of the link between a minister and a department, I just point out there's a number of situations.
It just seems to me that it's a lot of time to spend to formalize a name change. So, I mean, if the issue is being called minister, so everyone at the table gets to be called minister because that helps, I guess, in terms of their status. I mean, what's odd to me is that it seems to me that the implicit claim is that somehow sitting around the cabinet table, our prime minister would be less inclined to take their views and ideas seriously if they're called minister of state than if they're called minister. So and this is more a question for the minister, frankly. I mean, so he decided to call them ministers, I guess, to help him take them more seriously around the cabinet table?
What I was just going to point out, if I could, is there are other examples of ministries, for example, ESDC, where you've got two ministers within the confines of one department. So there are existing examples of what you're talking about.
There are, but the minister for whom departments are designated is nevertheless a new classification, and presumably the ministers we have now that aren't those kinds of ministers would nevertheless not become ministers for whom departments are designated. I mean, is it foreseen that, I mean, only the five ministers that we were originally talking about are going to become ministers for whom departments are designated? The new Minister of State, who's the Minister of Indigenous Services, presumably is going to eventually get her own department. I think that's the idea, or at least that was the stated intention of government. Not yet the case, because actually her resources are just carved out of the larger Ministry of Indigenous Affairs. So I'm just wondering, like, is this really just about a title change? And granted, there's some other things having to do with salary, but those things are already done. And the legislation still maintains two different kinds of ministers. It's just clouded over by the fact we're going to call them all ministers. So, like, what is really changing in this legislation? Why do we spend the time? I mean, when your government was trying to get other legislation through the House and complaining you didn't have the time, we spent time on this at second reading. Now we're spending time on this in committee. We're going to spend more House time on it in third reading, and largely things will remain the same after it's done. Why is this a legislative priority for your government?
So what's important to note, as I've said before, this formalizes what's already been taking place.
Indeed. I think
So
that's part and parcel of my question.
When it comes to these five ministers that you're referring to, I believe that they are essential voices that need to be at the cabinet table.
And they are at the cabinet table, and they'd be at the cabinet table as ministers of state. Is it the case that if you were called Minister of State for Small Business and Tourism, when you have a good idea at the cabinet table, you think the Prime Minister wouldn't take that good idea seriously because you're called a Minister of State instead of being called Minister?
Enjoy this debate. We're going to have to move on just because of time constraints. The one thing that I would perhaps to Mr. McCowan and the Minister ask you, and perhaps this can be answered in subsequent questions, a little question from the chair, and I think what Mr. Blakey's getting at is that now that the ministers of state, former ministers of states, are becoming full-blown ministers, has their authority and or responsibilities increased as well, commensurate with their salary increases? And I think that's a reasonable question to ask, because if they haven't, then it's merely just, as Mr. Blakey suggested, an increase in salary and a change of title. But if their actual responsibilities and authorities have increased, then that's something I think that Mr. Blakey was trying to get at. So that's my extraneous comments, but we'll now move on to Madame Bertanzi for 7 minutes,
Thank you,
please.
Chair, and you took the words out of my mouth because I was going to ask the Minister the same question, but thank you
You're
for
welcome.
preempting it. Minister, thank you for being here, and I will just clarify that Professor Margot Young, who came here, was really not suited for coming here because she knew nothing about the Salaries Act, and she was here to discuss gender equality, and I asked her which section of the press release even talked about gender equality. So that aside, the question that was asked by the chair, why has the Prime Minister chosen to could you let me know when its 5 minutes are up? Why has the Prime Minister chosen to elevate these ministers of state to full ministries? And are there examples from other, say, Commonwealth countries or other democracies that do that? And I'm going to put my questions 1, 2, 3 so that you can answer it, and then Karen will take over mine. And so this is one-tier ministry. I can understand equalization. I can understand that you're trying to go with a streamlined, agile, flexible government. And that is so that everybody is on equal footing. And you're trying to reduce an administrative burden as well, because all ministers are working together in a whole of government approach. So so give me some of the ideas behind the changes, and if there's been any research.
Thank you. So basically, the responsibilities have been shared with Canadians in mandate letters. We have committed to doing government differently by taking a whole of government approach, and every minister needs to work better together, because when we are making decisions, we impact other areas by default. By bringing us to the table and having equal voices at one table, the single tier ministry, as you're referring to it, really does better serve the approach that I believe is in the best interest of Canadians. When it comes to other jurisdictions, in other Westminster jurisdictions, the Prime Minister does decide on the organization of his or her cabinet, what the challenges are, what the needs are of the time, and they have the discretion to do, similar to what this Prime Minister has done, similar to what previous Prime Ministers in Canada have done. It's important to have flexibility when it comes to changing times, so that we can really serve the purpose of government. It's people who elect us to send us here, and we need to have all members of Parliament being empowered to do that good work, and we need to have ministers who are listening to colleagues on both sides of the House, as well as to Canadians, and that's been an approach that we wholeheartedly believe in, hence why we have consulted, hence why we believe it's important that we formalize what we put into practice through Bill C-24, and it's also important that these voices not only be recognized in practice, but in legislation as equals.
So I think maybe what will help clarify is if we have an idea of what the previous ministries used to do, or ministers used to do, because the mandate letter is the base of what a minister's responsibility is. So perhaps you've already increased their responsibility in answer to what Mr. Blakey was asking. Maybe you have, but I think if you give us a comparison of what others used to do before, that will give us a little idea of, and if you don't have it now, you can give it to us later, as to it really answers the questions. Do they have more responsibility? And I believe they do, because their mandate letter, there was no mandate letters before, if I know it correctly, and therefore these letters may give them responsibilities which are very much different than what they previously held. If you do have that, that would be good. So my other question is, the reason I was asking about other democracies like UK and Australia is that, do they have similar ministers of state? If Mr. McCowan can answer it, or Madame Boyle can answer it. Do you have any idea if they have ministers of state, and how, are there any best practices we could probably share?
So a common feature in other Westminster jurisdictions is that the salaries of ministers have to be authorized by law. In the UK, there are opportunities for a two-tier ministry. In fact, currently there are about 21 ministers and up to 100 ministers of state or parliamentary undersecretaries. So the flexibility exists for two-tier, but the option also exists just to have a one-tier. And that's what is the structure in Canada. And every Prime Minister, as the Minister noted, has the responsibility to structure their cabinet in a way that responds to the citizens' needs.
Minute and a half, good.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister and officials. In terms of formalizing this in legislation, first of all, I want to give you an example from the Atlantic region. As you know, as someone that's a member or representing New Brunswick Southwest, one of the comments I have heard is this different style and how we're approaching, and certainly from the OGGO mandate, would be businesses are very pleased with the quick responsiveness and the involvement of members of parliament to work with the COA on the regional basis. And actually, last night, the president of ACOA was here working directly with Ottawa and talking with us as MPs. So I just wanted to give that as an example. Looking at formalizing this in legislation, why is it important to Canadians? You've talked about, Madam Minister, about the flexibility, the adaptability. Why is it now important for Canadians to understand if we're going to formalize this in legislation? What would be the output for them? Thank you.
Thank you. An excellent example of being able to work with the RDAs and that they also feel that they have a role here in Ottawa as well. I would say why it's important for Canadians is because the diversity of opinions matters. Having the voice equal at the cabinet table matters. When decisions are being made, for us to not recognize the economic importance of these portfolios is unfortunate. What is good is that the Prime Minister recognizes that there is economic potential and growth opportunities in the betterment for Canadians. And that's what it comes down to, is that these ministers are not seen as assisting, they are seen as equal ministers making decisions, being part of the conversation, and being able to speak equally. And it's essential that we be able to do that.
Yeah, we'll have to stop there. We'll go to, I believe it's Mr. McCauley or Mr. Shipley. Mr. Shipley for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Interesting question or scenario that you've put. So really what you're saying now is that the minister that lives in Mississauga and those MPs that represent the regions, whether it's the west, the north, ACOA in the Atlantic. Really what you've said to them is that we're sorry. You folks that live in this area that carry that responsibility aren't capable of taking that message and be a national representative at the table. That's what you're saying. How does that make it better, having someone from Mississauga be the national voice on the diversity of this country and understanding that when he comes to the cabinet table?
Through the chair, respectfully, regional development agencies will continue to do the work that they do in their regions. And you know, I will speak for myself. For me, my country has 10 provinces, 3 territories. And regardless of what part of the country celebrates or hurts, it impacts me the same. And I think it's important that we recognize that we cannot be pitting regions against each other any longer. We need regions to work better together, and that's what it comes down to. The voice, for me, once again, 10 provinces, 3 territories, and when Canadian succeeds, I believe the country succeeds, and that's what it comes down to.
Well, we'll remember that, because what we're finding is that, quite honestly, that isn't the case. And so what I'm interested in also, though, Minister, is this. This is what your Prime Minister and our Prime Minister said. Referring to the appointment of the Mississauga MP as the Minister responsible for Atlantic Canada opportunities, quote, to reduce the kind of politics that we've always seen. Could you elaborate and tell me what that means?
The ministry you're referring to is responsible for economic development. Economic development is essential for the country.
What kind of politics? When he said reduce the kind of politics that we've always seen, I would say that this sort of bad politics, but maybe it's something different. Could you explain what he meant by that?
Mr. Chair, I will say that I'm here to talk about C24 in the context of C24. I welcome any questions in regards to what C24 stands for. I don't believe I've been called here to explain what other people's comments are.
Minister, with respect, the door has been opened to speaking about a variety of ministerial responsibilities. I believe Mr. Shipley, and you may not choose to answer, or you may not have a good answer, but Mr. Shipley is just asking to respond to a direct quote from the Prime Minister. And it was about getting politics out of, I guess, the process, whereas now you have a minister from Mississauga who's responsible for the Atlantic, the Regional Development Authority. So they're just asking a quick question, and I'll ask Mr. Shipley to perhaps rephrase it and then move on, because I don't think we need to
Point of
spend a lot
order,
of time in
Mr.
debate.
Speaker.
Yes, go ahead, Mr.
Asking a minister to comment on somebody else's minister, it's like asking for me to comment on what you've said. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. I just,
With
respectfully.
Thank you, but Mr. Drouin, with respect, I believe Mr. Shipley was quoting the Prime Minister and asking for the minister's comment on that quote.
I mean, if the Prime Minister, I mean, I don't know why he wouldn't clarify, because he's obviously has talked about a number of quotes, and we've had this discussion about equality around the table and responsibility. But no one is talking about responsibility, the change of responsibility in terms of budgets, in terms of deputy ministers, in terms of authority, but about a voice. So what you're telling us, without taking those responsibility, the voice is just a voice, that he would not accept the voice of a junior minister because they were a junior minister. I mean, it sort of flies in the face, quite honestly. If I was a junior minister, particularly, and he wouldn't listen to me because I'm just a junior minister, so what I'm going to do is going to give you more money and change your name. That makes all the difference, and now you have input. Isn't that really what this is saying?
I think not at all what it's saying. But at the same time, I think it's essential that we recognize that the regional development agencies will continue to do the essential work they do in the regions. They are able to also work together and share best practices. I believe this is a better model, and it's important that we allow the country to function as one country.
So do the responsibilities change?
Mr. Shipley, I think we're going to have to
ministers?
cut it off there. We've
Okay.
expired our time. Mr. Peterson, you're up for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister. Mr. McCowan, Ms. Boyle, for being here with us this morning. We appreciate it. I just want to maybe get an elaboration on. We know this act obviously formalizes the salary increase, formalizes the change of title. But what it also does, obviously, is provides departmental support to these ministries. And I wonder if you, Minister, or one of your colleagues can elaborate on the importance of that and why this legislation is necessary to empower that or give authority to that operational role.
So the legislation, there is a series of rearrangement of powers, duties, and functions you can do in terms of ministers of state. You're quite correct in saying that this legislation actually allows for the same thing to happen in terms of the listed ministers, in terms of the Act. So it allows for those appropriate transfers to happen so that the mandate letters that each minister has been given can be pursued. The only other additional piece in terms of the shift of functions, to go to one of the earlier questions, is that there are the 3 new positions that are created in terms of possible assignments for future ministries that some future Prime Minister or current one and sometime in the future might choose to make.
Thank you for that elaboration. Anything else to add, Minister?
I would say with my other hat, I'm provided all the supports necessary for me to carry out my mandate letter to ensure that we can succeed in the mandate the Prime Minister has given me.
Thank you. And I just, it takes we can take a step back and look at the new full ministries are La Francophonie, Minister of Science, Small Business and Tourism, Minister of Sport and Persons with Disabilities, and the Minister of Status of Women. And I don't think any of us, at least I hope none of us sitting around this table, wouldn't agree that those ministries deserve the full support of departments. They deserve the full resources of any other ministry. And without this C-24, that support, those resources, that empowerment, that authority to do these important jobs for Canadians under these important topics simply would not exist. Therefore, to say C-24 is unnecessary is to almost say La Francophonie is not important. It's to almost say science doesn't matter. It's to almost say we don't care about small business and tourism. We don't care about sport and persons with disabilities or the status of women. And I don't think, in fact, I know nobody around here thinks that or would ever say that. So I just think we want to make sure that we appreciate that legislation is necessary under the Westminster model to authorize and to allocate resources as the government of the day sees fit. And that's why we're here today as part of the legislative process. I don't think it's a waste of time. I don't think it's an unnecessary use of parliamentary resources. In fact, I think it's essential. It's an essential use of those resources. Without having the committee to do it, without having first, second, third reading in the House, these things wouldn't get done. You can't just wave a magic wand and make some presidential order like some governments can do and make things happen. The legislative process, my friend, is tedious, takes resources, takes time, takes effort, but it's important, it's necessary, and in fact, it's fundamental to our democracy. And Mr. Chair, I just wanted to make sure that everyone around the table is aware of what we're doing here and what this process is. I don't know, Minister, if you have any thoughts on the process itself? Or?
I would entirely agree. It's really about formalizing what's already been put into practice, and it's important that we do that. That is why we are brought to this place. So I totally appreciate you understanding the value of this legislation and how important it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. How's my time, Mr. Chair?
We have either Mr. McCauley or Mr. Shipley, unless you're ceding your time to Mr. Blakey. But
I'm happy with Mr. Blakey.
Mr. Blakey, then you'll have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. McCauley, for your time. I appreciate that greatly. I know because you're reforming these acts, you're familiar with them. Currently, there's 2 types of ministers of state. I'm just wondering if you could name them for us.
Yes, so there's a Minister of State and a Minister of State with a portfolio.
With a Ministry of State.
Ministry of State, thank
and
you
a
very
Ministry
much.
of State is effectively like a small department with all the resources of a department accorded to it by the government.
That's right.
For which they're completely responsible in the way that a full minister is responsible for a department.
That's true.
That's interesting. So it's not the case that actually you need to make these reforms in order to have all the resources of a department at your disposal, because you could create a Ministry of State for a Minister of State. Which kind of brings me back to my main theme, which is why this legislation, why it's important to allocate the time that we have already and will yet to this bill, both here and in the other place. One of the things that I found interesting in the debate around the ministers for regional economic development is that under the current model, you have choices as a prime minister. You could have a different minister for each regional economic development agency, or you could consolidate them in one, as this government has chosen to do. Removing them from the Act limits that possibility, because then a future government would have to change the Act in order to then have the separate ministers. And the rationale for that we've heard today from the minister is that she wants to change the Act to reflect the current practices of the government. Why is it that Bill C-24 doesn't eliminate ministers of state to assist and ministers of state with a Ministry of State, if the goal of Bill C-24 is to update legislation to reflect the current practices of government and the one-tier ministry model?
There's been a number of questions asked that basically go to the sort of raw question, what does this do? I think the best I could do in terms of summing that up is it comes down to 3 things. It comes down to, first of all, formalizing the cabinet in terms of...
I'm just wondering if you're answering because the minister's asked because she doesn't know the answer, or I mean, because there's a political dimension to this as well, and so I'm just wondering if maybe she wants it, particularly for the regional economic development ministries. There's been some kind of discussion of the politics of that in terms of regional representation. So I'm just wondering if the minister would like to answer to ensure that that the political dimensions of that are adequately represented in the government's answer.
The regional development agencies will continue to do the work of the RDAs in the
Yeah,
regions.
and they're being removed from the legislation.
Prime Minister had
Why
a
are
vision.
ministers of state to assist and ministers of state with a Ministry of State not being removed from the Act in order to represent the current practices of government?
Let's come down to why we are here for C-24. The Prime Minister spoke about the decentralization.
Is it not the case that we're here for C-24 to make the legislation cohere with the current practices of government? And is it not the case that the government says they won't use ministers of state, both kinds, because that creates a 2-tier ministry? And if so, why does Bill C-24 not remove ministers of state from the legislation?
You're asking why ministers of state aren't removed as a possibility for future governments? Is that?
That's correct. If there's an objection to ministers of state on the basis that they create a 2-tier ministry, which this government thinks is wrong, because it means that voices are not equal at the cabinet table, why wouldn't the government remove them from the legislation? I'm asking the government House Leader.
Future governments should be able to do what future governments need to do. Even
Well, then why get rid of the 6 separate ministries for regional economic development ministers? You've already consolidated them under one. Why are you getting rid of them in the legislation
Point of order,
to
Mr.
not
Speaker.
tie the hands of future governments?
Please, Mr. Drouin.
I'm just trying to listen to the answers, but the member keeps interrupting. Just wondering if we can referee this a little bit better. Thank you.
Well, I'm not sure about refereeing it, but what I will advise all members is that just as a general operating principle, regardless of whether our witnesses are part of the government or independent witnesses coming here, the practice of every committee is to, of course, treat them with respect. I'm not suggesting that you're being disrespectful, Mr. Blakey, and I'm not suggesting that you're badgering the witness, but I am suggesting that perhaps we give her some time to give a direct answer to a question, which I think is legitimate. But I would ask that the minister be given adequate time to make a direct response to a direct question. Minister?
Respectfully, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure that the member is looking for an answer. I think the member wants to make a statement. And so I think it's important that I also make a statement to remind members that this is about formalizing legislation. It's about regional development agencies being able to do the important work that they do in the regions. They know their regions better than any minister will, any member of parliament will, and we have to give them that regard. Regional expertise with national expertise is a way for it to work better together, to create a synergy, to take a whole government approach. Something the Prime Minister said during the campaign, talking about quotes, was about decentralizing the Prime Minister's office, empowering ministers to be able to do the important work they do. And that's why we are taking a whole of government approach, working with members, making ourselves available to ensure that we achieve the end goal, which is, I'm sure, every member's goal, to serve their constituents and to have a better country.
We're out of time. Mr. Drouin, 5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
The regional development agencies, and I have to say a few comments because I remember I wasn't in Parliament, but I remember working with the previous government on behalf of clients, and I recall when the member from Calgary, Nose Hill, was the Minister of Western Economic Diversification, but she was not the one that we went to get things done out west. We were going to the Minister of Canadian Heritage, which was the Honourable James Moore. So that confusion, to say that somehow that we've eliminated regional ministers is going to take away those voices, I disagree with that premise. I believe that we've now empowered members of Parliament to advocate on behalf of their regions. And that brings me to this point. How important is this to having a whole government approach to decision making, and how important is it for the MPs' voices to be reflected in that?
You know, we're all elected to be members of Parliament, to be the voice of our constituents, and that's really when we are able to shine. It's also when we're able to see that, yes, there is regional diversity, but our ridings have so much in common. And we can actually work better together by having tough conversations in our interest. I believe the voice of a member of Parliament, regardless of where you sit, is essential because Canadians need to be heard and reflected in the House of Commons.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Ministre.
Thank you very much. Another point that I find somewhat insulting is because we're comparing ministers according to the number of personnel they have or the powers they may or may not have. And I can guarantee you that I represent a riding that has a population that is 70% Francophone. And if the Minister of Francophonie wasn't here today, there would be demonstrations throughout the country. I just wanted to say that the Minister of Francophonie and all the ministers represented here in this bill are important for all of the people they represent. Perhaps you could tell us more without revealing exactly what's happening within the cabinet. I know there's confidentiality that has to be respected, but one thing the Prime Minister mentioned right after the election was that the cabinet decisions are the eminent force of our government.
Way forward for us, and you've mentioned the team, and I'd like you to elaborate a bit on this and how you're working with your other colleagues to make decisions?
Taking a whole of government approach and having people represented from across the country has, I believe, resulted in better decision making. Regardless of the cabinet table, members of parliament in the House are able to debate legislation, and we've noticed on numerous occasions where this government has listened to amendments and debated them to ensure the legislation was going to achieve the ultimate goal of benefiting Canadians. In that view, we've also worked better with the Senate to ensure that they are able to do the important work they do, once again, in the betterment for Canadians. Diversity of opinions matters. Having yourself represented and reflected matters to Canadians. It is a new way of doing things, and something I believe most of us would have heard is that Canadians expect members of Parliament to work better together. Canadians expect a government that listens, not only listens but hears and then is able to respond. That is the purpose of government, and as someone who really believes this approach of this Prime Minister and this government is the right one. The whole of government approach is something that previous governments have spoken to but never delivered on. This Prime Minister and Bill C-24 formalizing what we've already put into practice, I believe modernizes the way government needs to work and also provides greater flexibility to ensure that any opportunities or challenges can also be considered as time advances.
Thank you. And one last point that I want to touch on. Is, so this act allows for 35 ministerial positions, but we don't have a cabinet that's 35. And if I recall, and it's important to have voices at cabinet, but it's also important to be mindful of taxpayers. And I recall the previous government, I think they had, one of the biggest ministries, 40 ministers, and I think this was to 40 ministers, and 40 ministers is an embarrassment. I think they were tied for the largest cabinet in history. So I want to thank you, Minister, for coming to this committee. I appreciate your time.
If I can just respond really quickly that
Very quickly, Minister.
The Prime Minister's cabinet today is the same size as it was, but continues to be able to respond. On your earlier comment in regards to bilingualism and the 2 official languages of Canada, something that this government will continue to fight for. Nous sommes très fiers d'avoir 2 langues officielles.
We're proud to have 2 official languages, so it's essential that all voices are represented. Thank you.
Minister, you are now excused. Thank you for your appearance. I understand Mr. McCowan and Madame Boyle will be staying with us for the next foreseeable amount of time, at least 45 minutes. So thank you. We will suspend just for a couple of moments while the Minister leaves. Colleagues, thank you. We will reconvene. And I'm not sure who we have on our list on the government side, but we'll go into our normal 7-minute rounds and 5-minute rounds. Madame Bertanzi, are you taking the first?
I will, but our questions would, of the technical nature would just help the process move forward. But we don't really have too many questions for the department. I just wanted to know from an administrative perspective that these ministers that are going to be elevated to ministerial levels, for example, the current ministers, the secretaries of state, is there any monetary impact? Will they create more departments for them? If they don't, that's fine by me, but how will they work? Do you see any conflict in the way that they intertwine? The Minister for Science, Minister for Small Businesses, and the Minister for Innovation.
So this legislation doesn't create any new departments. In terms of the costs of the ministers themselves, it's just a question of the same amount of money being paid through a different vehicle. It will come through the Salaries Act rather than coming through appropriations for the group of ministers in question. But there's no change in terms of new departments that come as a result of
you're making it more efficient. I guess what people don't seem to understand is what is this whole of government approach?
So I tried, if I could, just to respond, there's basically 3 things the legislation does, and a few members have touched on this. So really quickly, just to try to give my best sort of technical explanation as to what that is. The first thing is it does put into legislation what's in practice in terms of the ministry. This is something earlier governments have done. It's not an unusual thing. It also sort of solidifies the one-tier ministry approach where everyone is clearly on the same footing, and it resolves the issue in terms of the federal-provincial territorial relations piece in terms of that ministerial title. So that's the first thing. The second thing that it does that's different is it creates the 3 new positions. So if at some point in the future a Prime Minister were to decide, they've got a little bit more flexibility in terms of those 3 spots. And the third thing technically it does is it basically allows the ministers in question, when they become full ministers, to get the support, the services, to do the delegations that are required to do what's in their mandate letter. So basically to allow, we have other mechanisms to do when they're ministers of state. It allows for that flexibility there. So those are kind of the 3 basic things that are done. I don't know if you wanted to add on to anything as well. Okay.
Thank you. My question is a quick one, actually. So in terms of formalizing this legislation, what would be the impact on other jurisdictions, such as the provinces and the municipalities? We recently had our first ministers meeting. So what type of impact will it have on discussions and collaboration at that level? Thank you.
You may be thinking of a dimension that I'm not aware of. I think it will basically solidify the existing practice in terms of how the ministry is structured, but I don't see a significant change in the area you're describing. But perhaps if you could direct me to a specific point I'm missing, I'd be happy to respond.
Sure. So I'm listening to the discussions this morning, the testimonies and the questions. It would be if there's equality across the board, certainly at the cabinet level for conversations, for investment, for listening and for output. If those same ministers, those 5 new ones that will be seeing the changes, if one of those ministers working through a whole of government approach was now working, for example, on the provincial level with a colleague on an issue, or talking with the municipality or the chambers of commerce, how might this make a change in terms of a whole of government or a Canadian approach?
I take your question. It formalizes the Prime Minister's approach of a one-tier government and solidifies the structure of the ministry, which has been stood up with the legislative frameworks that were available on day one, but this formalizes the foundation and the structure.
You have about 3 minutes left.
I don't think I've asked from my side. I don't think there is any more questions for the departments. Oh, sure. Okay.
You've got about 2.5 minutes left.
Just, Ms. Boyle, I was a little bit interested, just maybe for my own interest, but you compared the UK model a little bit. You alluded to they have a two-tier, and it had 21 ministers, I believe, and up to 100 junior ministers or ministries of state. Is that a legislative reality in the UK, or is that some sort of convention they use? And how do we compare to other Westminster jurisdictions on the one-tier, sort of two-tier analysis?
Well, certainly, as I said, the UK does have a two-tier. That is, in every Westminster system, the salaries have to be set by law, so that's a statutory requirement. In Australia, I think it is just one tier, also in statute. But again, the Prime Minister has, in every jurisdiction, the responsibility and the opportunity to structure the cabinet in the way that he wants, and there may be statutory amendments, as are presented here, that happen in those jurisdictions as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Macaulay, Mr. Shipley.
Thank you very much for taking the time to come out. As a Privy Councillor, your responsibility is what to the Prime Minister?
So first of all, I'm not a Privy Councillor. I'm a public servant who works in the Privy Council office, and I do a number of functions within PCO. Did you want me to run through those, or?
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, did you want me to go through that or not?
No, it was just a general, because in terms of advice, I want to go back. I'm going to follow up. Mr. Duran made some comments about previous government and the numbers, but in fact the efficiency in which the government operated. You missed that point. But the minister talked about the whole of government approval and the whole of government approach. But it was sort of interesting as what happened. We forgot to talk about, or I didn't hear her talk about responsibilities, and also I didn't hear her talk about the efficiencies. So this comes actually from an excerpt of the Atlantic Canada, the Liberal Caucus Committee, and the Atlantic Liberal Caucus Subcommittee on Innovation in May of this year, concerned about processing times dilute business growth and create inefficiencies and uncertainty. Businesses, some, have had to go obtain bridge funding while waiting for OGGO funding, which it says these circumstances are disruptive to business development. And then the concerning part should be to any government is that this perception among that the standard processing times, because this is now centralized, at OGGO have increased approximately threefold over the past year and a half, and that requiring ministerial approval necessarily delays the process. For example, a processing time now that was 30 days is now taking 60 days. And so then says centralized decision making is viewed unfavorable as impeding, I should say, the agility of programs. So knowing that, and as in your position, what would you suggest in terms of the centralization to the minister, in terms of making these improvements so that we get back on track, so that the regionals actually have some influence nationally?
So as a public servant, I'm not sure how I can go commenting on a caucus statement. What I would say in answer to your question is I think the minister earlier laid out the rationale for the integration of the RDAs, which I think is what you're getting at in terms of them having one minister. And on that front, I think her rationale was around a coordination of national economic development, and I'm not sure I can add to that. I think the minister gave you her rationale just in terms of why that change was included in the legislation.
Because also in that we didn't find any in the mandate letters that went out anything about change of responsibility, only the change of monetary. Does anything in the current law prohibit the Prime Minister from appointing a gender equal cabinet?
I'm not familiar with any such limit, no.
Okay. Does anything in Bill C-24 add new responsibilities or power to the current ministers of state who are, by this legislation, to be listed as full ministers with full salaries?
So as I tried to explain a minute ago, it does a couple of things. It allows for that group of ministers. We have a certain set of legal arrangements by which you can do adjustments in terms of powers, duties, functions, delegations if you're a minister of state. What this statute, what the statute does is it allows for the similar powers, duties, functions to be transferred to this group of ministers in terms of responsibilities, use of services of department facilities, appropriate delegations, etc. So it basically allows for a series of shifts to this group of ministers, which we would otherwise have to do if they were ministers of state in a different way. The only other change, you heard me before, the only other changes were the other 2 points I raised, but that's the major thing in terms of powers, duties, and functions.
So in the Act, it allows. It doesn't say that they will. Is that correct?
I apologize.
That they will have the responsibility. It allows for them to have that, but it doesn't say that they will. So right until they do, they actually don't have those responsibilities of budgeting, of as deputy minister, as responsibility in terms of legislative authority.
So there's a lot of good questions in there, so let me try to answer them all. So in terms of the way it's structured in terms of ministers, first of all, they get a mandate letter which sets out the things that the Prime Minister expects them to do. In the current structure of the ministry, where we have a number of individuals who are ministers of state, there was a series of internal administrative adjustments that were made, orders in council in a few instances, in terms of trying to empower and give life to what ministers needed to do what was in their mandate letter. With the passage of this legislation, it will be necessary, because they're now full ministers, to do a similar series of considerations in terms of the areas that I just went through, making sure people have the necessary services, facilities, the delegations, etc., so that they can continue to do what's in their mandate letter. Is that clear?
Well, in a way, because when I looked at one of the mandate letters, it actually doesn't spell out their increased responsibilities in it, in terms of a deputy minister, in terms of budget, carrying the budget for that department. I didn't see that in the mandated letter.
So the mandate letters are the central articulation of the expectations of the Prime Minister in terms of the responsibilities for each minister, and certainly there's nothing in this statute that touches on what's in the mandate letters.
So, as you said, it allows, but it doesn't. Direct. So, I'm likely.
No, we're out of time. Mr. Blakey, 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. So, part of the project around C-24 has been to try and, for me anyway, narrow down why it is that this legislation is actually necessary and why it's important for Parliament to spend time on it. We heard earlier that one of those reasons is to bring legislation into harmony with the kind of current practice of government. An earlier line of questioning that I was pursuing was why we're doing that in the case of regional economic development ministers, but not in the case of the different kinds of minister, because the government's not using ministers of state, so presumably if you wanted the legislation to go here, you would get rid of it, particularly if there's a principled objection to having ministers of state, which seems to be the case in the debate about whether you have a one-tier ministry or a two-tier ministry. That's not clear, but I won't expect you to answer that, so that's more of a comment than a question. So then the other aspect of the legislation seems to be creating equality of ministers, and I've been trying to hone in on what the relevant sense of equality is, because it's not exactly clear to me, if I'm being generous, because I think there is a kind of superficial answer, which is it's nice to be called minister, I guess, as opposed to minister of state, and maybe you get taken more seriously. In any event, what we did hear from the government House leader was that with this legislation, the kind of 5 ministries with which we've been concerned about largely within the debate, although there's a 6th now because the Minister of Indigenous Services is currently Minister of State, are ministers to assist. And one of the things that C-24 will accomplish is that these will no longer be ministers that assist other ministers. Is that true? Is that one of the goals of C-24? Is to eliminate scenarios wherein other ministers are characterized as assisting full ministers, let's say?
I'll ask Ms. Boyle to add on, but I think historically the Minister of State styling has been in that zone to assist a minister. What the government tried to do when the ministry was stood up, though, is right from the go to establish through the mandate letters a specific series of responsibilities for each minister and Minister of State, styled as a minister, and also to have some transfers of some of the powers, duties, authorities to those specific individuals. What you're basically seeing here is a formalization of what was done with the existing toolkit, if you will.
And so the goal
is
is to have ministers not be ministers that are assisting other ministers, but to be ministers in their own right with their own area of responsibility that don't have to defer to other ministers, who then would, because then there'd be a hierarchy. If one minister had to go to another minister for sign-off, you would have a hierarchy of ministers or a two-tier ministry. Is that not true?
My understanding is the goal is to have pursue the one-tier cabinet philosophy and to ensure that each minister is equipped with all the tools.
Okay, and so what we want to avoid is a hierarchy of ministers where some ministers would have to go to other ministers in order to get sign-off. Is that the case?
I'm not sure that I'm following your question. I think the objective is to ensure that each minister has whatever tools they need to do what's in the mandate letter.
Say I'm a minister of X, but I'm in a position where I have to go to Minister Y in order to get sign-off for my initiative. So I do the work with the resources that are allocated to me within a particular department, but before I can go ahead with something, there's another minister who, if they say no, it's trumped. Then you would have a hierarchy of ministries, and it's the goal of government to eliminate that hierarchy of ministers. Is that a right interpretation of the government's argument with respect to Bill C-24?
I'm not sure I feel like I can speak on behalf of the government as a whole in terms of the answer to your question.
I would need someone from government to ask that question to. For instance, like the House Leader.
What I would say to you, and I'm doing my best to answer your question here, is
and I do appreciate that. I don't mean any disrespect.
The objective is to try to give, starting with the mandate letter, the objective is to try to give all of the powers, duties, authorities, delegations, you name it, to the individual. And so in terms of sign-offs, it depends on what the sign-off is on. But if somebody has something within their unique purview as a Minister of State, they can sign off.
So what I'm trying to understand is in the structure of global affairs, you have the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who's the minister who holds office during pleasure and has the management and direction of the department in Canada and abroad. And then there are additional ministers for global affairs. The Minister of International Trade is to be appointed by commission, hold office during pleasure, and to assist the minister in carrying out his or her responsibilities relating to international trade. The Minister for International Development holds office during pleasure, and their job is to, quote, assist the minister in carrying out his or her responsibilities relating to international development, poverty reduction, and humanitarian assistance. A further clause says that a minister appointed under Section 3 or 4, that is to say those two sub-ministries, have to act with the concurrence of the minister in carrying, who's the Minister of Foreign Affairs. There's clearly a hierarchy within global affairs. The Minister of Foreign Affairs is the minister of charge. The other two ministers act to assist that minister, but need the sign-off of that minister in order to go ahead with things. If the goal of C-24 is to eliminate hierarchy within cabinet, should C-24 also not change the structure of global affairs so that the Minister of International Trade and the Minister of International Aid are independent ministers that don't require the sign-off of the Minister of Foreign Affairs for the work that they do?
I do think this is a...
I'm not, and I'll let obviously Mr. McCowan respond, but I'm not sure whether being a dedicated public servant, he's in a position to answer a question about how the government and his cabinet wants to operate.
Although I would note that the House Leader was quite ready to have him answer similar questions earlier.
Well, I'm certainly going to, Mr. McCowan can answer for himself, but I'm just saying I'm not sure whether or not he's in a position to comment on the Prime Minister's prerogative.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the comment. I'll do my best to answer within the scope of being a public servant. So what I would say to you is that there's a number of departments around town that are similar. ESDC has a similar structure. And machinery of government has been built up not by one builder, but by a whole series of builders over time. And in the course of many people having had their hands on the mortar, the bricks, and the trowel, you have all sorts of variations in approach across government. This is an attempt to give a rationalization to one component of that. I can't speak on behalf of the government to other parts. What I can say is this is an attempt to rationalize this corner of the structure and to give life to the objectives that the minister articulated.
I have Madame Shanahan down, but I'm not sure if anyone on the government side wants another intervention or not. Madame Ratanzi suggested you had exhausted your questions, but please go ahead if you have
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for this opportunity to explore a little bit further. It's sort of like a seminar in sort of government organization, the organizational sort of models. And I find it very interesting because we had a discussion about how other Westminster countries approach their government structures, which I imagine they have made changes over time as well, and also this sort of particular. And I come from the private sector, so forgive me, but it seems to be particular to government to be able to adopt an entirely new structure if they so desire when they enter government, which you wouldn't see necessarily in a public company. So, you know, our government has chosen this whole of government approach, and it's something that I think we're all learning about. So I appreciate your explanation and comments about that. I'm wondering, in the previous government, am I right in saying that there were positions called Secretary of State? Were there 3 positions for Secretary of State? It looks like Secretary of Skates here in my writing here, but Secretary of State for Small Business, for Multiculturalism and Identity, and for Asia Pacific Gateway. Is that something that...
I'm going from memory here, which is always a dangerous thing to do. I do believe there were some ministers, a number of ministers of state in the previous government, but I don't have the list in front of me, so I would be going from memory, which, as I say, is probably a dangerous thing to do. But how can I assist in?
Well, I guess so. Then my question would be: it seems that there was some flexibility there in naming different parliamentarians to different positions. So how would those Secretary of State positions differ from a Minister of State or a Parliamentary Secretary, for example?
This, I think, is a bit of a historic question, but I think that Secretaries of State were the precursor of Ministers of State. And when the Ministers of State and Ministries of State Act came into place, Secretaries of State were ended. And I would say that the last Secretary of State may have been in the 1970s.
Okay. Very interesting. Okay.
But you are quite right in saying that in the last government, for example, there was a Minister of State for Small Business, a Minister of State for Multiculturalism, and a Minister of State for a co-op.
Okay, so the title changes is what's different. Mandate letters. In previous administrations, was it the practice that each minister had a mandate letter?
I can't speak authoritatively for all of history. What I would say is what's unique about the current ministry is that they have mandate letters that were made public. That's the
okay, so we don't know if previous ministers had any kind of mandate letter whatsoever. That wouldn't be a matter of record.
I think it's beyond the scope of what I can speak to in terms of this particular appearance. What I can tell you is clearly for this ministry, there's mandate letters and they're public.
And they're public, and so clearly that's the first time that mandate letters for ministers have been made public.
To my knowledge, that's correct.
And certainly as a parliamentarian, I find them very useful. I consult them regularly. And maybe, Chair, we should have had a historian, a parliamentary historian here with us today.
You know, the chair is always open to suggestions from the committee members.
Thank you. Does anyone else have questions? Am I timed up?
It's not up, but if you have no more questions, I'll go across to our next intervener. Mr. Shipley or Mr. McCauley?
I'll do 4 minutes and Mr. Shipley will do 1.
Oh, sure. You have 5 minutes between the two of you.
Ms. Shanahan, I always enjoy history lessons, so thanks for bringing it up. Mr. McCowan and Ms. Boyle, just a very simple question. These new ministers, as opposed to traditional ministers, do they have equal powers? Not equal voice. Do they have equal statutory responsibilities in the cabinet?
every minister has unique powers, duties, and functions depending on their
Do
responsibilities.
they have all the powers of a regular full minister? Does the Minister of State for Women have the same statutory powers as Minister of Finance?
So as you know, there's a unique series of considerations that goes with each minister, and after the coming into force of this ministry, there was also some orders in council which transferred some powers, duties, and functions to some of the
The Minister of State for Status wouldn't be able to deliver memorandum to Cabinet under these new rules.
The Minister of State for Status of Women is responsible for the department that is called the Office of the Coordinator and can take forward MCs on her own with respect to that department.
Without someone, can or cannot?
Can.
But
Can. Does it have to be co-signed?
No, it is the policy of this Prime Minister under this Cabinet that ministers can take forward items, MCs, on their own. But it is also the expectation that if it crosses the mandates of other ministers, that they should be co-signed. And that's true for all ministers.
I thought that was under the Financial Administration Act, such protocols. Oh, don't interrupt me, please. Okay. C24, let's just go back to Mr. McCowan, just at the very beginning, asked about when the cost started for the added cars for the old minister estates and the salaries. You were saying that, as a minister, she said literally from day one, the day they were swearing in. My understanding, it came about a couple weeks later when the whole thing kind of blew up that it wasn't a true gender equal cabinet because we had these 5 junior ministries as that were occupied by women. You said you were going to get back to us on that. Is that something you could look into and confirm, or was the minister correct that from day one they had the car allowance and everything else that came with the full ministry?
So first of all, if I could say, you're referring to, I don't remember the news coverage in question that you're referring to. I thought your question, as I heard it the first time around, was in relation to salaries. Yeah. And I thought I heard you say that there was something in relation to back pay. My understanding, and we can certainly go back and I'm happy to undertake to look into it if your understanding is that there's some issue of a back pay. My understanding is it was salary was paid from day one, the same for all of them.
Okay.
But if you'd like, we can go back and look and see if there is some issue where took a couple of weeks for it to kick in or whatever.
Confirm, and I think what Mr. McCauley is getting at is, were these ministers of state paid full ministerial salaries plus all of the perks, car allowance, driver, that type of thing from day one? Or was it a few weeks or a period of time after they became ministers of states that their salaries had been increased? So I'm happy to look into it. I hadn't understood the second part of the question. I thought it was related to salaries, but I'm happy to look into it and we can provide to the committee a summary of how that happened. And are you familiar with the Senate Finance Committee concerns about how the money was paid out of supplementary estimates? I've heard that, I understood that there was a discussion around that, and if my memory serves me right, I think there was actually a ruling from the Speaker in the House. But what I can say to you is that the method by which the money is flowing now in terms of the Minister's estate and the ministers is the same that it's been for several decades. There's nothing unusual in terms of what's happening with this ministry as compared to earlier ministries. The salaries of ministers are paid under the Salaries Act, and in terms of ministers of state, it flows under the appropriations. But Mr. McCauley, you asked me to interrupt when you had about a minute left.
Out of time, but thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would like to have the committee's attention. I'd like to bring forward a notice of motion that pursuant to Standing Order 108-2, the committee immediately undertake a study of no less than 4 meetings on the proposed changes to the tax system outlined in the government's consultations titled Tax Planning Using Private Corporations, as publicly released on July 18th of 2017, in order to assess the potential impacts and the changes and the additional resources that will be needed by the Government of Canada in order to enforce the consultation paper's proposal. That the committee report its findings to the House, and that the government provide a response to the recommendations made by the committee. I put on notice.
Thank you, Mr. Shipley. Just give me a moment to consult with our clerk. I believe your motion is in order, but just one moment.
Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. The motion is in order. The motion was actually delivered and received by the clerk about a week ago. So it is on September 25th. In fact, the motion is in order, Mr. Shipley. You can certainly speak to the motion, and I will ask for a show of hands for a speakers list.
Mr. Chair, can we excuse the witnesses because it's now
Well,
business?
Mr. Shipley, we've got about 25 minutes left. Could you just give us perhaps an indication? Do you believe that, well, I'd like to see a show of hands first. If it looks like there's several people going to be speaking, then I'll certainly excuse the witnesses. It appears to me, and it's only a judgment call, it will probably be going till the top of the hour. In that case, Mr. McCowan and Madame Boyle, I thank you for your appearance here today, and you are excused. We will suspend for about 2 minutes while we go into camera. No, we won't go in camera, but while we reset for the motion. Colleagues, I'll reconvene. Just one quick update here for the committee's consideration. We do at some point in time have to get into the drafting instructions for the report on government advertising. Now, from a procedural standpoint, Mr. Shipley can speak to his motion. We will continue speaking to the motion as long as there are people on the speakers list. However, I, as chair, will have the ability to interject at any time just to be able to deal with we'll have to go on camera to deal with the drafting instructions. If that happens, when we resume, we will resume again with the person who is last on the speakers list and continue on in that fashion. So I just want to make sure everyone is aware procedurally what will happen, because I want to make sure that particularly with the report on government advertising that the drafting instructions have been given and we can move on whenever this motion has been dispensed of, okay? So I may be, in other words, interrupting in about 10 minutes or so. But Mr. Shipley, until then, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to all of my colleagues. I don't suspect there would be an issue with wanting to actually look at this. This is something that when the tax reforms came in, I mean, they basically affect every jurisdiction, and the majority of our and certainly the majority of our job creators in this province, in my province, but also every province across the nation. We know that for sure. Every MP, regardless of what position or what party you're in, have been receiving ample multitudes of calls, letters, and emails regarding the concerns of these tax reforms. One of the things that was obviously quite concerning is that in July, in the middle of summer, the government dropped this onto our businesses. As they have a couple of other things, actually. Another one is in agriculture in terms of the national policy, strategy policy, and the Canada Food Guide. But in saying that, it seems that dropping this in the middle of the summer, when people are away, when families are engaged, what families actually want to do in the summer, it's a time across Canada where we can spend some time with families, and then put a 75-day consultation time. You forget, I think they forgot, and maybe it's because there isn't enough, I'm not sure why, but in agriculture it's huge. Actually, summer's a busy time in agriculture because we're in the midst of just finishing the planting. The livestock people are in the midst of harvesting, and then obviously through the summer we're into a number of crops that are being harvested. But then to stop it in October, which is sort of interesting, just right after kids have gone back to school, small businesses are actually planning for the year. They're getting ready for the seasons that come up, as small businesses do. And of course then agriculture is into the main harvest. So right now we have individuals of all businesses, and I know we've all heard from them about the concern and that is about these tax reforms. And particularly the target of these small business owners. I think, if I remember right, 2/3 of small business owners make something like $63,000 or $70,000 a year. And so the government has chose to target these individuals, these family. I would love to take the opposition to all the family-run small businesses that you're targeting that have got the anguish in them because they don't know what to do, whether they're in farming or they run a bicycle repair and sales store, whether it's running the franchise that they have in the Tim Hortons or the McDonald's, and it's compounded, obviously, in Ontario by a number of things that the Liberal government in Ontario have put on. But the interesting part that really bothers me, I get the question, so what about the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance? I mean, they're multimillionaires, got all this money. What extra are they paying? I said, well, right now, until they change it, I guess there's no impact to them. It's all about you. And so that becomes another frustrating part for them, because they look at it, and as well, but he talks about the middle class. I said, yep, pretty much every day, and then turns around and sticks it to you every opportunity. Oh, except that he did give you more for childcare, but actually, if you go back, I think now the cost extra to you is the middle class, they call it. I call it the middle income earners in our country. You're now dinged about another $800 more than you were before they took office. And so it is a concern, and that's part of the reason why this has come forward. The other part of it, Mr. Chair, and to my colleagues, is that there's an incompetence that has happened within the governing Liberal Party. Because they say they're going to raise the taxes to generate income. What they aren't talking about is that, as what the professional accountants and economists that are in my riding. I think they're likely as wise as the government ones that are giving the government their expertise advice. But these guys are saying, and these ladies, quite honestly, are amazing at the public meetings they're having. They're raising huge issues about what this is going to do to impact our families. These are not the large multinationals that are on the public domain. They're not the offerings that we see in the TSX. No. These are the ones when you drive down the main street. I don't care if you're in the main street of Toronto, Hamilton, Fredericton, or London, or in Strathroy, or in Wallaceburg in my area. These are the folks on the street, folks. These are the guys that got the engineering or the manufacturing along the side. And so to go back to the incompetence, what they're finding is that, well, they'll say, but I was told, and we believed them, that when they got elected, they said they promised. Well, actually, they promised every meeting that we would have this small deficit of $10 million. Wow. So now that's going to double or triple. But what we're going to do is tax the top. Don't worry, because we're going to tax that top 1%. We're going to tax those rich people and give it to you. Well, they hope to have raised a couple of billion dollars out of that. But in fact, when you start taxing people, things actually go in the reverse. And so now, instead of gaining $2 billion, they lost revenues of $1 billion. And so instead of having a plus, now they're in a negative. We wanted to, they promised, oh yeah, we're going to promise to our small business people, we're going to lower that business tax down to 9%. So I'm waiting for the Minister of Finance to actually step up to the plate on that promise also. But he hasn't mentioned that. He hasn't mentioned it to our small business people. He just hasn't done that. But what he wants to do is bring forward these reforms that protect the elite and protect those who don't have to worry. And so here we go. What I'm suggesting is that I think for everybody here, this is a concern. And so I think it's important for all of us. And I'm sure the ones, our friends on the other side will want to know, what is the potential impact? I mean, I don't know how we can talk to these folks without giving them, because there's all kinds of stories out there right now, but nobody will give the details. And this will help us.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Let's wrap
Shipley.
it up, and I suggest we go to a vote on it.
The member, if there's more speakers on the speakers list, I cannot call a vote as long as that happens. If you have concluded your remarks, Mr. Shipley, I would go to the next person on our speakers list. Have you concluded your remarks?
And to assist Mr. Shipley, I now move that the debate. Debate be now adjourned. Yes.
That is a non-debatable motion. It calls for an immediate vote. All in favor of the motion to adjourn? Opposed? The debate is adjourned. I will now suspend for a couple of moments while we go in camera and discuss the drafting of the government report on advertising.